Spoke to iAfrican CEO Theko on the ramifications of a breach like this.
Based on what the alleged hackers have said publicly, meaning that they said that there's financial data in there, customer data in there, the ramifications could be huge. Even if it's just email data, it could be FICA documents, it could be all sorts of policy documents. So the ramifications could really be huge for customers.
Well, to take this discussion a little further, joining me in studio now is tech journalist Adam Oxford and Hloni Theko, the CEO of Pretunes. Gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Peter, for having us.
All right, okay. So, Adam, we spoke at the weekend, a weekend ago, and we were talking about this kind of thing. But I want to start with you. Pretunes, tell us a little bit about that and what it means for a business like yours.
Well, we actually happen to be in the ICT space, software and communication, and over the last 18 months, we've actually started working in the cybersecurity space as well.
All right, so how does an organization the size of Liberty, with that type of records keeping, get hacked?
Well, obviously, cybersecurity as an issue in South Africa is just something that's kind of come up in the last 18 months. And we don't necessarily have the protocols internally as things stand to actually put from an organization perspective and even from a national perspective, because this is not just an issue that's just isolated to Liberty, but it's also something in a broader context of how our government and different departments function in the country. So what you'd find that more often than not, because the IT protocols in terms of security are not in place, information tends to slip up and there isn't governance as to how it's controlled internally.
So does that mean we're vulnerable until a group of people sit in a room and decide, listen, we've got to stop this? Adam?
So I think, to be fair to Liberty, email is very, very hard to protect. But I think I'm not a Liberty customer, so I don't know what kind of information they gather via email, but I know there's at least 3 big insurance and utility companies that have asked me to send copies of my passport ID, copies of my bank statements, copies of my proof of residence to them in order to open an account over email in the last year. And that means that kind of data is probably in this breach as well. And so we are at risk. We're at real risk. That kind of information is the jackpot for identity theft.
How sophisticated must you be to break into a system like this? Because it doesn't seem like, sort of teenagers in the back room of their flat. This requires quite a lot of technology and expertise.
Yeah, I mean, it's at the moment we don't know how they got in or who got in. The suspicion is probably that there's an element of an inside job. Most big corporates now would have some sort of monitoring on their network to see the volume of data that we suspect has been taken. There are claims that there's about 40 terabytes of data that have been leaked or been taken. So I think a lot of corporates now have the kind of monitoring systems in place where they would spot that if there wasn't some assistance from inside. But until Liberty, offers us a few more details, it's really hard to say.
So what sort of protocols should be in place that are missing that we can't wait for government and all these other people to come to the party? If I've got a company and I'm going to take care of my customers, what should I have as a minimum in place?
Well, right now, obviously, getting IT security expert to be part and parcel of the capital expenditure, operating expenditure of a big corporation or even a smaller corporation now has to be standard. It's something that most is only coming online right now, but now it needs to be standard. And then even beyond that, there needs to be a bit of education for employees and even the broader public as to how to protect their basic information, and also regular changes of their passwords. And as Adam mentioned, not be liberal with your information, especially when it comes to ID numbers and emails and also your phone number, because between those 3 things, identity theft becomes a real possibility.
I find it remarkable that, when you buy a car, you will lock it up in the garage, you'll have all sorts of fancy alarm systems. Because it's a physical thing, we'll do the things that we need to do to protect it. But somehow, when it starts to get into an electronic world, we see things differently and we kind of trust people much more. Does that speak to our psychology?
Well, it's actually funny enough, before he came in, me and Adam just had a short conversation. We were talking about the fact that here in South Africa especially, we still have that big element of trust. Like, you trust that a big corporate will actually take care of your information. And in reality, you don't know when you send an email with all your copies of IDs or whatever documents that you've been asked for online, you don't know whether or not it's actually reaching the intended target. And right now, there currently aren't any laws that actually govern and protect you, that in the event that it's breached and it's used illegally or in an unsolicited manner, that you got any recourse that you can follow afterwards.
What's the situation abroad? I mean, is it the same? Are we suffering equally, or we just a little bit behind the curve?
I think this is potentially a really interesting test case for this, because the European Union has recently brought into force its General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, which means that if there are any European citizens who are customers of Liberty whose data has been lost in this breach, they're protected by that particular law. So this is almost setting itself up to be a really interesting test case for the limits of the EU's jurisdiction, because they want to be able to punish companies overseas who lose European citizens' data. And this is exactly the kind of case that they probably could be very interested in getting involved with.
So Liberty say that there have been no financial losses, but I guess what they're saying is yet, right?
I think they're saying there's no financial losses in terms of people breaking into their accounts, taking investments out and spending them directly. But the long-term knock-on is something that they, I mean, nobody can say right now what's going to happen. And the likelihood is that if the data does appear online, a little bit of it is leaked already, it will be used. I mean, it almost certainly will be.
Once you know that you've been intruded and that they've broken in, and they said they found out on Thursday, they only told customers on the Saturday, we'll talk about that just now. Does that mean that there are other parts of the business that are now vulnerable as a result of that breach?
Most likely, yes, but at this point in time, we'll be speaking purely from a speculative point of view. We don't have any facts at this point in time because the investigation is still ongoing. But I think the most interesting thing is currently what kind of investigation is taking the lead. Because as things stand here in South Africa, we don't necessarily have the infrastructure and the general expertise to be properly investigating cases of this magnitude.
So are we likely to bring in people from abroad to get to the bottom of this?
Ultimately, those are the most experts come from abroad. Unfortunately, at this point in time, South Africa does not have an agency that's dedicated to be dealing specifically with cases of this nature, unlike countries like the USA, the UK, and also Portugal and South Korea.
These hackers might not even be in the country.
Well, quite. I mean, we literally don't know, and I think going back to notification and stuff, I think actually Liberty are dealing with it pretty well as could be expected. I think they have been upfront about the fact that that they've been hacked. I mean, I guess they had to be. They knew that the leak was coming. But again, it goes back to the type of data that's been lost. Once we get clarification around that and where it came from, we'll know then whether there were inside connections, whether it was an inside job, in which case they would have been based in South Africa, or whether it was an opportunity from anywhere in the world.
Can somebody, having hacked the email, then hack the email of all the people in my email box, as it were? I mean, you know, how far does this now expand?
Well, the reality is we don't know, but there is a probability that could happen, hence why one of the announcements that Liberty did make was that people should be able to change their passwords, especially if it's the same as the banking password, if it's the same as the ones they use for their Liberty logins, because that information, as it's been clearly stated, most of us tend to use the same password across different platforms. So if they've got, if the hackers have got one password and your logins, they could actually use it across all your platforms.
All right, so Liberty is a huge company and they've got dedicated IT people and so on and so forth. What about SMEs and smaller companies? What should they be thinking right now? Because they're thinking, you know what, we don't have the same kinds of issues that Liberty has, but, you know, information is information.
So, I mean, I'm a big fan of the theory of not collecting data you don't need. And the problem we've got at the moment, I think, is that from a business point of view, we've been trained over the last few years to gather everything, to take as much data as we can, to learn about our customers, to get to know them better. The problem is that there is no way you can secure that data that is ever going to be 100% safe. So my advice for SMEs would be, you know, get the data you need to make your business function, but don't get stuff that is going to put you and your customers at risk if and when it gets hacked.
Yeah, I'm feeling very vulnerable at the minute, and I can imagine people at home are thinking, what do I do? Do I go online? You know, I was shocked the other day. I was watching a television program, and then one of the actresses in there was called Asia something, can't remember her name, and I went on to Google Asia, and her name come up, and there's just no ways that connection should have been made. But clearly there are algorithms that are doing all sorts of things, and I'm sure that even these companies are keeping some kind of algorithms to better service, and that's the danger of having so much big data.
Well, it is true. Algorithms are being used, obviously, to monitor behavior, especially when you're watching TV and they use your phone and what you actually search for. This is used primarily by companies to sell the information for advertising purposes to third parties. And this is the gray area that we seemingly are finding ourselves conflicting with from a corporate perspective, whether, as you said, people collect a lot of data, and data sharing has become big business on its own. I mean, you look at the company talking about Liberty right now, they've got 3.2 million customers in Africa alone. I mean, that's quite a huge base to be working with. And you can just imagine how envious everybody is of that particular data, and they'd like to use it in all manner of things.
Can we refuse to give up certain bits of data, or maybe say, what do you need it for?
I'm a big fan of customer revolt. I genuinely think we should be putting our feet down and refusing to give up data. I mean, the other day I went to a hotel for a meeting with an NGO, and the car park attendant wanted to take my fingerprint before I could park my car in the hotel car park, and, and I would literally rather leave my car parked on the street and have somebody steal it than leave my fingerprint in a random database that I know nothing about. So I think there's somehow, and I don't know how we do this because I've been trying to do it for 20 years, we have to try and convince people to learn about their digital footprint, to understand what they're giving away, and to take responsibility for it, because nobody else is ultimately. I mean, you have to be careful about what you're giving away and where you're giving it to.
So once you've been hacked, what do you do? What's the next step?
Well, first and foremost, once you've actually been hacked and you've reported it to the relevant authorities, you have to start by changing your password if the information that has been accessed is because your password has been breached, and also, where possible, change the username of whatever platform you're actually using. And then, more than anything else, more than likely, make the password also a bit difficult to crack, because more often than not you still find people using ABCD or 1, 2, 3, 4 as a password, and that tends to be, and we've made it easy. And in order to avert this, from a personal point of view, you need to actually change your password on a regular basis, and also be vigilant in checking that there isn't any unsolicited activity that happens in whatever platforms you're using, whether it be internet banking or personal emails, or even a company server, even if you're a small SME.
Should we be insisting, like if I've got an account at Liberty, that they change my account number, because that will scramble or whatever it is that they've stolen? Surely they've got to take the pain and reset more than just shutting the door.
It's difficult. I mean, I think the critical thing about the Liberty attack is if that data that people have stolen includes photocopies of ID books, photocopies of bank accounts, photocopies of proof of residence, then changing your account number at Liberty isn't necessarily going to solve that. And you know, changing your passwords, as you say, is really the most basic defence, and it's easy to do. You can use software, the password vault software, that will remember every password you need, so thousands of passwords, make them all very difficult, if not impossible to crack, and you only need to remember one master password to get into that vault. And that for me is the very basic level of security that everybody should be doing, because that gives you such a strong level of protection against most of the common attacks on individuals out there.
And don't have the same passwords for everything.
Exactly.
Right?
Ideally.
But it's hard to remember, and perhaps that's where this password vault thing is. And don't keep it in your phone, yeah?
That's true, because we generally tend to lose our phones more often than not. And one of the other things that a country like South Africa, for example, 20 to 25% of all people now have smartphones. So we're quickly migrating everything online. And one of the things that really needs to happen, we need to have a bit of cyber education for the general public so that we better protect ourselves.
All right, okay. Very finally, 10 seconds. What's the biggest lesson we all can learn from what's happened to Liberty? You can start.
Be a lot more conservative about how we share personally identifiable information, PII.
And you?
Need to be, from a corporate perspective, need to be a bit more stringent on IT protocols, and we need to start also investing a bit more on the IT security infrastructure.
Okay, gents, thanks very much indeed for sharing your thoughts with us. I'm now scared to switch on even the light, just in case it's digitized. I'm going to stick to using my pen and pencil and carrying everything with me now. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, well, in fact, we're going to carry on right now. One